Hi, I'm Niall Stanage from The Hill, and you're very welcome to our latest conversation. My guest today is James Carville. James is one of the leading Democratic strategists of his generation. He's probably best known for his central role in Bill Clinton's victorious 1992 campaign for the presidency, and maybe too for coining the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." He's worked on lots of other high-profile campaigns, both in the United States and internationally. He's also a media commentator, the author or co-author of numerous books, and the co-host of his own podcast, Politics War Room, alongside journalist Al Hunt. James, you're welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's get straight into this. We're now inside 100 days from the midterms. I know you're not a big respecter of the conventional wisdom. The conventional wisdom holds that Democrats are probably going to lose the House but have a shot of holding on to the Senate. Is that how you see it?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just go with facts as opposed to conventional wisdom. First of all, the polling is on the rise for Democrats in what they refer to as the generic congressional. It's definitely improved over the summer. We have real elections that we can look at that are traditionally, I mean, maybe it's always been a good barometer of what's going to happen in the off-year election. Democrats had a terrible 2021. We lost in Virginia. We barely won in New Jersey. There was nothing there to be anything other than be panicked by. Actually, we have three recent elections in the Midwest. One, a Nebraska special and a Nebraska first, where the Democrats substantially outperformed expected performance. We had a ballot referendum in Kansas where it stunned the political world. It won by, 18, 19 points in a state that Trump carried by about 15. Then you had a special election in rural Minnesota. Its Cook PVI is +8 Republican, which means that normally they'd win 58-42. Trump carried the district by 10. The Republican won by 4. So you can, if you want to ignore all of this evidence and go with conventional wisdom, that's fine. Conventional wisdom has this working for it. In the past, it is excellent barometer of the party's performance is presidential approval and wrong track. Well, presidential approval, as we know, is low, very low. Wrong track is high, very high. But there's some evidence that this year there's significant decoupling. In terms of the Senate, I see that I think 538 has 60% chance the Democrats win the Senate. It's easier for me to see us picking up 4 Senate seats than it is for us to lose 3.
Okay. Now, what is propelling that decoupling? If the approval ratings are where they are, if the right track, wrong track numbers are where they are, but you fairly point to the evidence that things might not be that bad for Democrats, what is causing that disconnect?
Well, you ask 100 people, you'll probably get 100 different answers. I think the Republican Party is just people find it unattractive and hard to vote for. A lot of people do. I do think that the Supreme Court has interjected itself, where if you ask people, who do you think holds real power in this country, President Biden and the congressional Democrats or the Supreme Court and Mitch McConnell, you would get a surprisingly high number would say the Supreme Court and McConnell. And I think voters are saying, well, it's time for a change, and then they ask what change? And I don't think they're particularly impressed by the change that's being offered them. Now, again, you would have to consider that there's a real possibility that gravity and the laws of political physics return, and the Republicans have a big year. That's not an unreasonable thing to assume, but so far it's not happening in polling or in real elections.
And what do Democrats have to do to drive home that advantage, or to give them the most favorable plausible outcome rather than the less favorable one that you just described?
Let the Republicans talk. Hold their coat, give them the microphone. And then I think that what you do is you say, look, we're not where we need to be, but we're starting to make progress, and they can make a very compelling case of that. And you ask people, what do you think we need in this country? More freedom or less freedom? Do you think we need more guns or less guns? Do you think we need more pollution or less pollution? Because this Republican Supreme Court has restricted freedoms. They have said there are not enough guns in the country and there's not enough carbon in the atmosphere. That's wrong-headed. That's not the kind of change we need. I think that'll get you pretty far. And does it get you far enough to overcome inflation in particular, which is pretty indisputably a fairly heavy millstone around the Democratic Party's neck right now? That's the question. But the inflation and the gas prices have abated. That's a fact. Whether it continues to or not, I don't know. It would certainly help if it continues. And you certainly can't say this has been a do-nothing Congress. If anything else, has been a done-a-lot Congress. So I can't. I acknowledge that inflation is a real issue. I acknowledge that elections, particularly in the past, have been driven by presidential approval and direction of the country. But another person have to acknowledge it's not going like it's supposed to, not either at the ballot box or in the polling numbers, and also in the recruiting. Remember how many really good Republicans didn't run? Larry Hogan in Maryland, Chris Sununu in New Hampshire. All right, there are any number of examples of really electable Republicans looking at it and saying, "No, I don't want to do this," and they have a particularly bad slate of Senate candidates. I could go through them, but if I were a Republican right now, I don't know what I'd do, because this is an election that we can't do. We should be winning, and we're not. And I would just be beating my head against the wall. Right on top of that, this Mar-a-Lago story, which might be the biggest story since 9/11. That's not going anywhere. Right. All right? Well, not going anywhere. And you're a Republican candidate. Well, if you're a Democrat, you're going to get asked about inflation. If you're a Republican, you're going to get asked about Trump. Talking of say inflation's bad, they can't say Trump is bad. Right. Talking of the Mar-a-Lago story, I should maybe emphasize for people who see this, we're talking on Friday, August the 12th, so don't come at us if we're not discussing something that hasn't happened as we're recording this. But the Mar-a-Lago story, how politically significant is that? I understand, and everyone understands, the ethics and the potential legal ramifications to some degree, but how electorally significant do you consider that story? Well, okay, I'll give you the Republican argument. Look, this is librarians fighting over each other. Okay, what classified, president can classify, declassify, whatever he wants. Maybe he made a couple of mistakes. This is librarian stuff. Why are we doing this? All right. By the same token, it's really people understand. Everybody's going to the movies and everybody's kind of read spy novels and knows what documents are and classified. And of course, don't know if it's true, but the Post reports that some of them pertain to nuclear documents, new technology. Everybody understands that. That's not a complicated crime. Right? This is not something that, if it's a archival dispute, they will portray it as, excessive jackboot persecution, the IRS, the alcohol, tobacco, and whatever, ATF. But if this thing turns out to be substantial, which I suspect that it will, every Republican's going to have to say, well, what did you say about this? This is what you said. Do you still believe that? Or you stand with Donald Trump? Because they got to say they stand with Donald Trump, because if they don't, they lose a substantial part of their base. It's a very, to a guy like me, who's not a national security guy, but is a political guy, this is a very tricky issue for them. It's hard for them to come up with a good answer. But the best answer is Merrick Garland is this crazed prosecutor who hates Trump, that is acting outside the scope of what he should be doing, which I think is highly unlikely. I don't think that anybody really believes that describes what Merrick Garland is. But you have to say, well, that could be possible. They're trying to make the case. I watch Fox News, and I spend more time listening to right-wing media than most any other Democrat. And it's funny that they're just on that. This is the best news we ever had. Okay, great. Keep saying it. One day you might believe it.
Just to take a broader focus for a second here, James, because we like in these conversations sometimes to kind of talk a little bit about people's backgrounds and where they come from in their political stance. You grew up in a small town in Louisiana. You served time in the Marine Corps before entering politics. You went to LSU, I believe. You didn't graduate there initially, but you spent several years there. Yeah.
What's 8 and 3, 11? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So it strikes me from a, like, not to reduce you to a sort of democratic, I should say demographic template, but it seems to me that the Democratic brand now, as opposed to when you were coming up, among, you know, honestly, white men from the rural South who may have spent time in the service, Democratic brand does not strike me as particularly strong in those kind of cultural or demographic groups these days. What went wrong, or why is that?
Well, I'm speaking to the Kansas Democratic Megas annual gathering in Wichita on August 20th. And the topic of my speech is, what does it mean to be a red state Democrat? And the truth of the matter is, we are a very different, a very hardy bunch. You know, we kind of have to live off the land. We don't win a lot of elections. And so much of what's happened to my party is we tend to get defined by some overeducated, totally doofus coastal elites that are out trying to write dictionaries or something unrelated to anybody's life. And that kind of stuff has a tendency to be very sticky, to stick with people. It's not who the party is. They're a very small part of the Democratic Party, but they're very noisy, and they get much more attention than is justified. And understand that they're very, they really do think they're smarter than anybody else. I'll give you a really good example. There's a New York Times editorial writer. He's the chief economic editorial writer. All right, he's a very big deal there. And LSU played Clemson for the national championship on January the 13th, 2020 at the Superdome in New Orleans. Just so you viewers know, the Superdome to the LSU campus is about 78 miles. The game was played on a Monday night. The president of LSU, quite sanely, said we're gonna suspend classes Tuesday because my daughter was a senior. No one wanted their kids, you know, after winning the national championship and probably inviting them in a drink or two to be driving. Seemed to be a perfectly sane thing. Well, this guy, Mr. Benjamin Applebaum, sends out a tweet. And he says, well, the Sanders-Warren free college tuition plan apply to LSU, or does it just apply to real schools? Now, the problem is that he said that, and the problem, all of his friends agreed with it. Because Mr. Applebaum wouldn't know a football from a pineapple. All right, people that live in actual red states actually like football. Even non-white people love football. Okay, it's not of the purview of just, you know, that. And if you don't understand that, how can you be an editorial writer? You have no idea of what America is. And it's people like that identify. So we have a Democratic governor, you know, a damn good Democratic governor in Louisiana. And he's got to put up with this kind of ignorant crap. And it happens all the time, I'm telling you.
I don't actually dispute that it does happen all the time, but it's not only coming from editorial writers in the New York Times, right? I mean, the people who write dictionaries, I think, or want to write dictionaries, as you put it, they're all a part of the, I mean, that involves or encompasses some people in the Democratic Party, right?
Okay, the Pew poll, they're very, very substantial, very mainstream, kind of they're located in Princeton or something, right? They broke the country into 9 different groups. One group were true independents. It was smaller than you think, but I don't know, 7, 8% maybe. And then they had 4 groups of Republicans, with different names, and they had 4 different groups of Democrats. Of the 9 groups, the smallest was people that described themselves as progressive liberal. It was 11% of the Democratic Party and 6% of the total electorate. All right? It was the only majority white part of the Democratic Party. That's very important, right? They understand that. These people have the ability to irritate. They have the ability to come up with really stupid things, like defund the police. Three worst words ever in the English language, maybe. And it's let's get rid of Abraham Lincoln. That takes a really smart person to come up with that. So we pay what huge majorities of the Republican Party don't believe in evolution. Right? Huge majorities of the Republican Party follow Donald Trump and whatever that insanity is. But somehow or another, we pay a greater price for 11% of our people than they do for 65% of their people. And it's just stunning to a guy like me.
And what can
go ahead.
Well, and so what can people who would be Democrats of your ilk, of your worldview, what can they do about those people who you consider idiots, essentially?
Make fun of them. And let me say, when they say, James, we have our crazies, but look, you have your crazies, and it's what pronoun you have, or veganism or something. The problem is people who believe in that are just silly, all right? People that believe that the election was stolen and they have a right to storm the Capitol, which is a substantial number of people in the Republican Party, are evil. Our people are kind of silly. Their people actually, racism is evil. All right, misogyny is evil. I'm sorry. A pronoun to me is, okay, fine. I mean, it's kind of like, if you want to be a vegan, I don't care, eat what you want to eat. All right, but that's not the same thing. All right, it's just not. And yet the media it is addicted to both siderism. Well, you have your crazies and they have their crazies. What the hell's the difference? A lot. A lot.
Just briefly, I wasn't going to actually raise this, but just when we're talking about it, you saw, I'm sure, that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar got a little bit of a scare in her primary there just a few days ago. It was closer than a lot of people expected. Do you think that's emblematic of the majority or a large swathe of the Democratic Party having a lot of problems with those kind of defund the police, more left-wing views?
People don't look at the New York mayor's race. They had a really, truly liberal, I don't use the word woke anymore because it has a great origin. It was by Leadbelly in the 1920s, Leadbelly. And he talked about the necessity of black folks, particularly in the South, of being aware of their circumstances. I refer to it as the identity left. They didn't do well in New York City. They lost in Buffalo. They even lost in Seattle. They lost the whole defund the police thing substantially in Minneapolis. The San Francisco School Board got voted out. I'm not surprised at all. Not at all that she didn't do very well, because that's really not what the Democratic Party or the Democratic voters are at all. And they just have contempt. That the identity left doesn't like Democratic voters. They don't like, James Carville or Joe Biden or Bill Clinton, because that, and I hear all this jackassery about, well, Clinton was just a carpenter who really didn't do anything for middle class or working class people. She only had 22% increase in wages for black people, but maybe you don't think that's anything, but I do. And they just repeat the same nauseating stuff all the time.
Well, to that point, I'll just one more point in this, and then we'll move on to a final few questions. But to that point, you know, you and I are both old enough to have seen this debate between the left and the centre left, or however, whatever labels you want to use, play out repeatedly in the Democratic Party. Certainly happened in Bill Clinton's time, the DLC and all of that. One of the arguments that the left frequently makes is more radical or activist positions will engage more voters, will persuade voters who don't normally vote to come to the polls, and so it is therefore wrong to criticize their positions as being an electoral drag. What's your response to that?
There is everything to support that but evidence. All right, read anybody that has studied this. It's idiotic. That's what it is. And it's been tried, and it fails, and it's going to fail every time, because that's not where people are. It's just something they all tell each other. All right, they all tell each other. Joe Biden ran, Bernie Sanders ran, Elizabeth Warren. They had no problem. They ran to the left. All right, they didn't just get beat; they got slaughtered. And the same thing happened in Buffalo. The same thing happened in New York City. And they just keep repeating the same thing. And I really don't even care anymore, because the argument is just amazingly and stunningly stupid. And there's no evidence of it.
President Biden, as you say, has low approval ratings. I'm assuming you know him fairly well, having been around in Democratic politics as long as you do. I assume you have regard for him. Has he made significant mistakes, or has he just been unlucky, essentially?
Well, first of all, everybody makes significant mistakes. It's the nature of politics. I don't know. He's probably had as good a summer as any president that I've seen. I mean, if you look at what happened. So is he the world's, can he communicate like Bill Clinton or President Obama? No. But if you look at performance and you look at his, and I think his appointments have, almost all have turned out to be very substantial, very capable people. So inflation does bother people. And, the president gets the blame for everything that goes bad. It's always been that way. But my contention always was, it was even during President Clinton, is it's okay, blame us for everything bad, but give us half the credit for everything that is good. And I think if you do that with President Biden, you're going to find substantial achievements.
Do you anticipate that he will seek a second term and be the Democratic nominee for a second term? This is not an evasive answer. This is the way I have always been. I'm a very superstitious guy, and I've always thought you never, they say a statesman looks to the next generation, a politician the next election. I look to the next tracking poll. All right, and I right now, I am totally focused on 2022 when 2024 rolls around. But if he certainly has a hugely impressive record, and he's certainly well liked among Democrats, which is something. But yes, I think very highly of President Biden. I think I'm not presumptuous to say we're friendly. I'm not that part of his inner circle, but we're definitely friendly. And I think he's shown real perseverance and real stick-to-itiveness, and it seems to be that it's starting to pay off somewhat. Have you been surprised that some Democratic elected members have been equivocal, and not just people like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, but Congressman Phillips, other people who are not part of the left? Does that surprise you?
Right. It just not come out. I mean, not really, But that's just not the discussion to have right now. We got one of the most critical congressional elections that are coming up, and from my vantage point, it's kind of bad karma, somewhat even bad manners, to think when I got a Sherry Beasley I'm helping in North Carolina, Val Demings in Florida, Tim Ryan in Ohio. You know, those are people that I know and help, and friends of mine I truly love. And I got to think about that. I really do. That's just the way I look at the world.
Looking ahead to 2024, which I know you don't really want to do, but I'm not going to ask you about the Democratic side. Who is the Republican potential nominee that you would fear more than any other?
Well, first of all, I don't think the Republican nominee is going to be Donald Trump. But it's not a thing to argue because we don't know that increasingly. And I think that this stuff going on with these searches is very, very serious and very harmful. The problem that the Republican Party has is Lester Maddox, the former governor of Georgia, said famously, the problem with the prisons in Georgia is the quality of the inmate. The problem the Republican Party has is they got really stupid people that vote in their primaries. And when you have that, you're going to get really stupid people demand to have really stupid leaders. And that's where the Republican Party is now. And that's why if you go look at it, it's not, you know, not all of it. There's obviously some very high quality, you know, smart, patriotic Republicans, but they're not in the majority. And they would tell you that themselves.
And that, I guess, gives you hope, electorally speaking, as a Democrat, because you think the dynamics of Republican primaries mean they're going to choose unelectable candidates and with quite great frequency.
I think they have done it now. All right. I think Blake Masters, who questions whether we should have gotten into World War II, I think it's not a popular position to have. All right. J.D. Vance, you know, Herschel Walker. I mean, come on, man. That guy had an ill-fitting helmet. He's not right. He's not right at all.
We've been talking a lot about, you know, particular candidates, particular races, all of that. It seems to me we're in a time where a lot of people feel a lot of anxiety and worry about where we are, not just politically, but societally. I mean, there's January the 6th, there's disinformation, there's people's apparent credulity with conspiracy theories. Just the day before we are having this conversation, there was an apparent attack on an FBI facility in Cincinnati. You've been around a lot of political scrapes in your time. Are you optimistic about the near term for the United States as a society, or are you worried about it?
60-40 worried in the immediate future because, you know, it may be the pandemic, I don't know, but you got people that are just rude, you know, like punching flight attendants and you know, screaming and, you know, at some fast food workers. I mean, there's a part of just rudeness in this country that I'll be 78 in October. I've just never seen it. I've literally never experienced this in everyday encounters with people, how rude they are. And I mean, I know all the crazy stuff in Cincinnati in January the 6th, and a lot of that insanity, you know, occupying downtown Portland. I mean, that's just rudeness that is incomprehensible. And I hope that as we go forward, that we can have some kind of a return to this kind of way that we did our interpersonal relationships. But it's pretty worrisome out there. I got to tell you, I'm very, very careful when I'm traveling. You know, I don't encounter people because you just don't know who's out there. It's a concern.
Do you get confronted as you go about your day-to-day life by people who don't like your politics? I mean, people can disagree with you, of course, but do you ever get, like, threatened?
Yeah, like sometimes, you know, a lot when during the 90s, all right? For some reason, I think this might be my age, and I get, sometimes I do, but mostly people, you know, are courteous to me and leave me alone, particularly in Louisiana, because most of the people I encounter are Republicans, but I have some cultural identification with them, so it's a little better. But I don't experience it very much, but I don't expose myself to it very much either.
James Carville, thanks for your time, and hope we talk to you again.